Online at cspan.org in our video library. The House is gavelled back in. They'll consider 4 bills first, renaming post offices, and back at 6:30 for a bill eliminating the Election Assistance Commission. Live coverage of the House now on C-SPAN.
Taken after 6:30 p.m. today. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1632.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1632, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 5014 Gary Avenue in Lubbock, Texas, as the Sergeant Chris Davis Post Office.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 1632, introduced by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nagelbauer, was to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 5014 Gary Avenue in Lubbock, Texas, the Sergeant Chris Davis Post Office. The bill is co-sponsored by the entire Texas delegation, and Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor myself. Mr. Speaker, it's altogether fitting and proper that we name this post office in Lubbock for Army Sergeant Davis to honor a true American hero and his service to our country. Sergeant Davis was born on October 25th, 1971 in Lubbock, and according to his sister Margaret, he was always helping people and serving, even from a young age. She recalled that he was always helping and serving and always thinking of someone else. That was Chris. With his passion for service, Chris joined the Army in 1999 and was eventually assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 69th Armor Regiment, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 3rd Infantry Division, based out of Fort Benning, Georgia. While deployed in Iraq, Sergeant Davis was tragically killed on June 23, 2007, when his unit was attacked by insurgents using an improvised explosive device and small arms fire in Baghdad. He was 35 years old and left behind his wife, Debbie, and 2 children. As a representative from Texas, it's my honor to stand in this chamber and pay tribute to fellow Texans who have made the ultimate sacrifice, courageously defending our country's freedom. I'm truly grateful for the service of Sergeant Chris Davis and for all those who serve and protect us each day. I urge all members to join me in strong support of this bill. And I reserve the balance of my time, sir.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
On behalf of the House Committee Oversight Government Reform Minority, I'm pleased to join my colleagues in consideration of H.R. 1632, which would rename the United States Postal Service facility at 5014 Gary Avenue in Lubbock, Texas, as the Sergeant Chris Davis Post Office. The bill before us was introduced by my good friend, my colleague, Representative Randy Neubauer of Texas on April 15, 2011. In accordance with the committee requirements, the bill is co-sponsored by all 32 members of the Texas delegation. Further, H.R. 1632 was unanimously reported out of the House Committee on Oversight Government Reform. Mr. Speaker, I would like to briefly highlight the achievement of the honorable service of Sergeant Davis. After graduating from Estacada High School in Lubbock, Texas, Sergeant Davis enlisted in the Army and was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 69th Army Regiment, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 3rd Infantry Division, stationed out of Fort Benning, Georgia. Sergeant Davis was killed while serving in Baghdad, Iraq, while insurgents attacked his units with small arms, fire, and an improvised explosive device. From his early childhood, Sergeant Davis was always described as being a server, whether it was helping out in his community or looking out for friends and family. His decision to enlist in the Army and serve in the nation will be the crowning achievement of his ability to give back to his community. Always described as a happy-go-lucky individual, Sergeant Davis will forever be remembered by his ultimate sacrifice to our nation. I ask that we pass the underlying bill without reservation, pay tribute to the honor, value of this young man, displayed, and so others understand his commitment and sacrifice to protect our nation. I also join my good friend from South Texas, also my colleague, and I urge the passage of H.R. 1632 and reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Cuellar. At this time, I'd like to yield as much time as he may consume from the gentleman from Texas, the gentleman from Lubbock, who represents Texas Tech University and a fine area of West Texas, from the great state of Texas, to sponsor this legislation, Mr. Nagelbauer.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nagelbauer, is recognized.
I thank the gentleman and thank the Speaker. I rise today to honor a fallen soldier from the United States Army. Sergeant Chris Davis of Lubbock, Texas, was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 69th Armor Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Benning, Georgia. He joined the Army in September of 1999 and proudly served 4 tours in Iraq, 2002, 2003, 2005, and 2007. On June 23, 2007, while deployed in Iraq, Sergeant Davis was killed in action when his unit was attacked by insurgents using improvised explosive devices and small arms. He was only 35 years old. The bill currently under consideration, H.R. 1632, would designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 5014 Gary Avenue in Lubbock, Texas, as the Sergeant Chris Davis Post Office. I believe it is important for Congress to honor the sacrifice of this soldier and his family, and I urge my colleagues to support this measure. Chris was born October 25, 1971, grew up in Lubbock, Texas, graduated from Estacada High School, and later enlisted in the Army in 1999. Before enlisting, Chris was a welder in a machine shop. Sergeant Davis wanted to serve his country from a very young age. According to his father, Ray Davis, said that while Chris was in school, he expressed a desire to join the Army. His family remembers that he used to say, "I want to fight for my country. I want to do something for my country, and that's what I'll do." And he said, so if something happens, don't be mad at anyone. Chris earned quite a few awards during his honorable service to our country: 1 Army Commendation Medal, 3 Army Achievement Medals, 1 Presidential Unit Citation, 1 Good Conduct Medal, 1 National Defense Service Medal, 1 Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, 1 Southwest Asia Service Medal, 1 Iraqi Campaign Medal, 1 Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, and 1 Global War on Terrorism Service Medal. Sergeant Davis will be remembered as a valiant soldier and a wonderful son, father, husband, and brother. He loved his family and was known to always place others before himself. His sister Margaret remembers that Chris loved to have barbecues just for the opportunity to give him time to spend time with his family. He was known to make people laugh. He had the knack for cheering up anyone around him who was having a bad day. Chris was proud as to be an American, and he bravely served his nation that he loved. Chris is survived by his wife, Debbie, his daughter, Taylor, his son, Zachary, his parents, Raymond and Herminia, and 9 siblings who I am sure are watching today. And on behalf of the United States Congress, we thank you for your sacrifice. As I speak these words, I'm reminded of the words of Abraham Lincoln used in his famous letter to Mrs. Bixby, the mother of 5 sons who were killed during the Civil War. And I quote, "I feel how weak and fruitless must be any words of mine which should attempt to beguile you from the grief of loss so overwhelming. I pray that our Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost, and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid such a costly sacrifice upon the altar of freedom." Abraham Lincoln, November 21st, 1964. Mr. Speaker, with the 4-year anniversary of Sergeant Davis's death just a few days away, I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 1632 in honor of Sergeant Chris Davis and designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 5014 Gary Avenue as the Sergeant Chris Davis Post Office. And I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar.
Mr. Speaker, I have no additional speakers at the moment. If the majority is ready to close, I'll yield back the balance of the time, so I would make that inquiry.
I am indeed ready to close, Mr. Speaker.
Then at this time, Mr. Speaker, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Mr. Speaker, along with my Texas colleagues, I'd like to urge all members to support passage of H.R. 1632, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1652? Those in favor, pardon me, 1632. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Yes, I'd like to request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. Number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on the question will be postponed. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass S. 349.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 349, an act to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 4865 Talmadge Road in Rootstown, Ohio, as the Marine Sergeant Jeremy E. Murray Post Office.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker, that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, S. 349, introduced in the Senate by Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, would designate the facility of the United States Postal Service at 4865 Talmadge Road in Rootstown, Ohio, as the Marine Sergeant Jeremy E. Murray Post Office. From a young age, Marine Corps Sergeant Jeremy E. Murray had a strong desire to join the military and to serve his country. According to his mother, Pam, Sergeant Murray talked constantly about wanting to join the military. In fact, he prepared so well for boot camp that he was able to break down a rifle faster than his superiors, something that didn't please his drill instructor. Sergeant Murray joined the Army in 1996 after graduating from Waterloo High School in Atwater Township. He was later assigned to the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division, 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, and served 3 tours of duty in Iraq. Tragically, on November 16, 2005, Sergeant Murray was killed by a roadside bomb outside Fallujah. Sergeant Murray was 27 years old and left behind his wife, Megan, and his son, Ian. He was awarded the Purple Heart, the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, and a Gold Star for heroism. In closing, I'd like to read a quote from Sergeant Murray as recalled by his father, Harold. Sergeant Murray told his father, "If I don't come home, Dad, you know I died proudly. I died for what I wanted to do. This is my lifetime dream." America and I are grateful for Sergeant Murray's service to our country and for all our brave men and women in uniform who sacrifice so much each and every day. I urge all members to join me in strong support of this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
On behalf of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform Minority, I'm pleased to join my colleagues and my friend from Texas in consideration of S. 349, which asks that we designate a postal facility in Rootstown, Ohio, after Marine Sergeant Jeremy Murray, who faithfully served his country until his passing in November of 2005 after his 3rd tour of duty abroad. S. 349 was introduced by Ohio State Senator Sherrod Brown on February 15, 2011, and was passed by the Senate without amendment by unanimous consent on May 16, 2011. Congressman Tim Ryan from the state of Ohio introduced H.R. 725, also on February 15, 2011, which serves as a companion bill to the measure being considered currently. Marine Sergeant Murray was a man who bravely served his country and was awarded the Purple Heart, a Navy and Marine Achievement Medal, and a Gold Star for the heroic achievement in Iraq. His mother, Pam Murray, is a longtime employee of the same facility for which S-349 is naming in honor and memory of her son. Mr. Speaker, with respect for his achievement and sacrifice for his country, I urge the swift passage of this measure, which will recognize Sergeant Murray's contribution to America by naming this postal facility after him. I urge passage of S-349 and reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
I'm prepared to close.
If there's no further speaker at this moment and the majority is ready to close, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, is ready.
All right. As I do have no other speakers at this time, I am going to yield back. I'd like to urge all members to support passage of S-349s and yield back the remainder of my time with that request.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass S-349? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are
Mr.
suspended.
Speaker.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Yes, I'd like to request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 771.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 771, a bill to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 1081 Elbow Road in Schertz, Texas, as the Schertz Veterans Post Office.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask for unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 771, introduced by my friend and colleague, the gentleman from South Texas, Mr. Cuellar, would designate the facility of the United States Postal Service, located at 1081 Ebel Road in Schertz, Texas, as the Schertz Veterans Post Office. This bill is co-sponsored by the entire Texas delegation, and I'm a proud co-sponsor myself, Mr. Speaker. It's altogether fitting and proper that we designate this post office in Schertz to honor those who have sacrificed so much for this nation, our veterans. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend my colleague from Texas for introducing this legislation and also commend him for introducing H.R. 1318, the South Texas Veterans Health Care Expansion Act. I'm a proud original co-sponsor of this legislation as well, which is vitally important to the veterans all over far South Texas. H.R. 1318 would expand health care across the more than 117,000 veterans who reside in far South Texas. Currently, without adequate medical facilities, many of these veterans are forced to drive over 6 hours to the nearest facility in order to receive needed medical care. This is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, and we can do better. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to report that this legislation passed the House last week as part of the Military Constructions and Veterans Affairs Appropriation Act for fiscal year 2012, and it is my hope that the Senate will act swiftly on this measure and the President will soon sign this important bill to law. Mr. Speaker, the VA estimates nearly 49,000 veterans currently reside in the 27th Congressional District that I am honored to represent. This makes up much of far South Texas, along with the district Mr. Cuellar and Mr. Hinojosa represents. Texas has an estimated 1.7 million veterans who, according to the VA, there are approximately 22.5 million veterans all across our nation. To the men and women who served, thank you for all you've done, for the countless sacrifices Texas that you've made. I'm truly grateful for your service, the hardship you and your families have endured, and I am proud to stand in this chamber and honor you here today, with both bills, renaming the post office and our Veterans Bill for South Texas. With that, I urge all members to join me in strong support of H.R. 771 and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
First of all, I want to thank my good friend and colleague from South Texas, along with Congressman Ruben Hinojosa, and then on the Senate side, both Senators Kay Bailey Hutchison and Senator Cornyn. We're all of us working as a team. We've been working to improve the access to veterans in South Texas, and I think my friend said it ably. There is a need out there, and we're working together to make sure in a bipartisan way that we provide that health care to the veterans, and I certainly want to thank Mr. Parenthood for all the leadership that he's provided. Thank you very much. H.R. 771 will designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 1081 Elbow Road in Schertz, Texas, as the Schertz Veterans Post Office, to honor those who have served our nation's defense. Many of us know someone who has served in the military, a friend, a family member, a parent, or a neighbor. Nearly 2 million veterans, almost 10% nationwide, call Texas home, and I thank them for their service. Our veterans have been given full measures of devotion, sacrificing their time, their youth, in some cases their health, and in all cases time with their families. The Schertz Veterans Post Office will be located in the city of Schertz in Guadalupe, which is connected with the military presence with Randolph Air Force Base nearby, which I represent. Guadalupe County, which Schertz resides, is the second highest concentration of veterans in my district. Thousands and thousands of them live there in Guadalupe County. This legislation will name a landmark to serve as both a reminder and a sincere thank you to the veterans at home and abroad. I urge passage of H.R. 771 for all the brave men and women who have fought for our country, and I thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
I'm prepared to close.
I have one speaker, and at this time I would like to yield as much time as the gentleman.
The gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would like to yield my good friend, Congressman Lloyd Doggett, as much time as he may consume to go ahead and speak on favor of H.R. 771.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett, is recognized.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank both of my colleagues from Texas for using this as an opportunity not only to herald this important bill, but the importance of health care for our veterans in South Texas. As a sponsor myself through several sessions of this effort to strengthen health care in South Texas, I'm pleased we're finally making some progress on it, and we need to continue to redouble our efforts, whether it is there or at Audie Murphy or at the Brooke Burns Center or at Lackland, or as with our success last Friday in Austin, Texas, where we broke ground on what will become the largest veterans outreach clinic to provide outpatient care for our veterans of any place in the entire United States. But of course, what brings us here today principally is the bill that Congressman Cuellar introduced and that I am a sponsor of to salute the veterans of Schertz, Texas by renaming this as the Schertz Veterans Post Office. With so many in the Schertz area who've contributed so much to our nation's freedom, there just aren't enough public buildings in Schertz to name all of them for the individual sacrifice that has occurred. And so this bill very practically approaches the heroism and the contribution of so many veterans and their families in Schertz by renaming this building the Veterans Post Office. Schertz's connection to our armed forces is a proud and storied history. Most of the community's growth began going back to a general store in the last century, in the 19th century, but it began in the 20s and 30s by the Army's construction of what was then called in Hollywood and elsewhere the West Point of the Air, then the Randolph Field, before the Air Force was even formed. And today, Randolph Field may be called Randolph Air Force Base, and Schertz, Texas may have had since 1990 a tripling of its population. But some things have not changed. And one of those since World War II, 1946, and the end of that war, as the veterans were returning, has been the chartering and the continuation of the Veterans of Foreign War Post, commanded by Mike Espinola. It is still a thriving heartbeat of community activities. And families are also still coming to Schertz, Texas. They're coming in droves because even CNN recognized it as one of the best places to live anywhere in America. So often, rapid change will divide rather than unite. And that can be especially true when you have people coming from literally all over the world in a community practically adjacent to a military base and otherwise filled with many commuters. But unlike so many other parts of our country, where folks return to the same street without a sense of neighborhood, the people in Schertz have maintained a community spirit that is reflected at the Schertz Family YWCA that recently got the Strong Community Award, at Pickerel Park, or at a football game at Samuel Clemens High School. This renamed Veterans Post Office will help maintain that community spirit and serve as an anchor and as a reminder of where Schertz came from, how it has grown, and the road ahead. A while back, I stood at this very microphone to speak up for the renaming of a post office in South Austin on South Congress, the street that once connected San Antonio and Austin, for Sergeant Henry Ibarra III, who was killed in Iraq. I remember the dedication service that we had there, joined by the Catholic War veterans, the American GI Forum, LULAC, the Knights of Columbus, in addition to the family and friends of Sergeant Ibarra. It meant a great deal to them. And I believe that the same thing, the same kind of inspiration, which they feel every time they go into that hub of community activity, will be realized as well in Schertz, Texas. Our veterans, whether they wore a uniform last week or decades ago, understand a fundamental truth. Our military is the strongest in the world because of the spirit and the bravery of the men and women who put on that uniform. And as a grateful nation, we must continue to honor their service by meeting their health care needs and by taking steps like today in the renaming of this Schertz Veterans Post Office. I think it's a step in the right direction. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time.
Speaker, I'd like to reclaim my time. I want to thank the gentleman from Texas, my good friend, my colleague, Mr. Lloyd Doggett, for his dedication, his passion, his commitment to the veterans. For many years, he's been supporting the veterans, has worked very hard. If there's anybody that works very hard for the veterans, it is my friend, Mr. Lloyd Doggett. I certainly want to thank you for co-sponsoring this legislation. At this time, we have no additional speakers at the moment. I believe the majority is ready to close, and if that's the case, I will yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farron.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I too would like to thank the gentleman from Texas for their ongoing and continuing support for the veterans. There is not too much that we can do for the men and women who sacrifice time and again for our country. They sacrifice their time, they sacrifice their work, and sadly in some cases they're asked to sacrifice their lives. I stand in strong support of this bill and urge my colleagues to pass H.R. 771, renaming the post office in Schertz, Texas, Veterans Post Office. With that, I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 771? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass S. 655.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 655, an act to designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 95 Dogwood Street in Cary, Mississippi as the Spencer Bird Powers Jr. Post Office.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I'd first like to ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material under Senate 655.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. S-655, introduced in the Senate by Senator Thad Cochran of Mississippi, would designate the facility of the United States Postal Service located at 95 Dogwood Street in Cary, Mississippi, the Spencer Boyd Powers, Jr. Post Office. Spencer Boyd Powers, Jr. was born on February 12, 1945, and grew up in Cary, Mississippi, a town that his family has called home for nearly a century. While growing up in Cary, Spencer Powers had a sense of duty and service ingrained to him by his father, uncle, and other relatives, all who bravely served our country during World War II. During the mid-1960s, as the Vietnam War progressed, Spencer Powers decided it was time to step up and serve his country. He was commissioned in the U.S. Army as a second lieutenant and fought valiantly until his tragic death on February 8, 1968, during an offensive attack operation in South Vietnam. He was only 22 years old at the time and just a few days shy of his 23rd birthday. Mr. Speaker, I am truly grateful for each and every member of our armed service that has paid the ultimate price and given the ultimate sacrifice in the name of freedom and in the defense of our nation. Spencer Bird Powers, Jr. and his family are a great example of the values that make this country a wonderful place, a country where sacrifice, duty, and a selfless desire to serve inspire and motivate people to cause a greater good for themselves and for others. To the Powers family and to all the others who have served, I say thank you. I'd like to urge all members to join me in strong support of this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar.
Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of the House Committee on Oversight, Government Reform, and Minority, I also want to thank my colleague, Mr. Farenthold, for the leadership that he's provided on managing these bills. And I'm pleased to join my colleagues across the aisle in consideration of S-655, which would name the United States Postal Service facility at 95 Dogwood Street in Cary, Mississippi, as the Spencer Bird Powers, Jr. Post Office. The underlying bill before us was introduced by Senator Thad Cochran of Mississippi on March 28, 2011, and passed by the Senate on May 16, 2011. Our colleague, Representative Betty Thompson from the state of Mississippi, also introduced a companion bill to this measure in the form of H.R. 1072. Both measures aim to acknowledge and recognize the heroic service of Spencer Bird Powers, Jr. by renaming the local post office in Cary, Mississippi in his honor. With his father and other relatives serving in our armed forces, Spencer Bird Powers would continue their legacy by joining the United States Army, where we would serve this nation honorably up until the point of this death. In 1968, Spencer Bird Powers unfortunately would become the first member of his family not to return home from serving in war abroad. Spencer Bird Powers was killed in an offensive attack operation in the Vietnam War. I ask that we come together as Americans to honor Mr. Powers' sacrifice so that those who continue to serve after Mr. Powers can understand his commitment and his courage to serve on behalf of this beautiful country that we call America. I urge my colleagues to join me in honoring this fallen soldier and vote in support of passing H.R. 1072, rename the Dogwood Street Postal Facility in Cary, Mississippi as the Spencer Bird Powers Post Office, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
And I am prepared to close.
The gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar.
Speaker, I have no additional speakers at the moment, and if the majority is prepared to close.
I am indeed.
In this case, Mr. Speaker, I urge passage of this Senate bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farrell.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, urge all members to support the passage of Senate 655, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass S-655? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to consider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.
The House will be back in about 25 minutes for what should be their only recorded votes of the day.